Welcome, everyone, to the Tory Burch Foundation Business Webinar Program presented by our partners at Bank of America. Today's session is about brand resilience in a changing world, and we are going to learn all the elements of a strong brand and how that can help drive your business and make your business thrive even in challenging markets. Using your brand to drive customer-facing communications as well as internal decisions, and leveraging the brand to make decisions in the face of the many platform and algorithm changes we know are out there. I am Molly Heffernan, Vice President of Marketing for the Tory Burch Foundation, so of course I'm very excited about today's topic. And I am so thrilled to be here with Robin Young, who is a repeat webinar speaker. We're so glad to have Robin back. And Robin is a creative and brand strategist and the founder of Young & Co. And in Robin's almost 20 years, she has successfully driven businesses and brands to results that have made them category innovators across industries like CPG, beauty, fashion, education, wellness, and tech. Robin is well-versed in the brand space, and we are so lucky to have her with us. And I will say, Robin is also the author of Build Your Brand Universe, a fantastic read that came out earlier this year. So we will drop a link to Robin's book in the chat. Make sure you pick up your copy of her book. After Robin's presentation, we will have plenty of time for Q&A, folks. So make sure to ask your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can. And use that chat for all that community building, connecting with the other founders today, asking each other questions and getting to know each other. But Q&A box for questions for Robin. So today's session will be recorded. We'll send out slides and everything afterwards. So if you miss something, it is okay. You can go back and you can replay. So I think, Robin, welcome.
Thank you. Thank
I'm
you
gonna
so much.
I'm gonna hand it to you.
Love it. I'm ready. Let's rock.
Perfect.
Okay, let's see. Let me first get my slides up here with me. Okay, make sure we're all ready to go. All right, ready to rock? Everybody can see we're at the
Looks
sunset.
great.
All right, amazing. Okay, so first of all, welcome everyone. Thank you so much to Tory Burch Foundation for having me yet again. I'm sharing one of my most favorite topics today, which is brand resilience. I want to take you all on an expedition with me to understand why it is that some brands can withstand market shifts, pivots, changes to consumer behavior and preferences, while others fade away. Why is that? Before we go on this journey together, though, I'd like to invite each of you to think of a brand right now that has won you over, something that has truly won your heart and has stood the test of time for you. Put it in the chat for me. I want to see what those brands are for you. Like I always like to take a temperature check to see who's really resonating these days. I will try and reference these throughout my talk too. Oh, I see some good ones already. Tory Burch, naturally, well done you. Ferragamo, good. Puma, yeah, Puma's a good one. The Gap, Thrive Cosmetics, yes, love what they're doing. Farm Rio, yes. Nike, yep. Anthropologie, I am an anthro girl myself. Would buy a rock from them any day. Trader Joe's, nice one. All right, love it. I will keep an eye on that as we go, but I'm going to keep things shuffling along today. Okay, so first a quick intro. I'm Robin. I'll be your speaker on this trip today. Like many of you, my career has evolved over 2 decades in the business, and with that, my brand has evolved. I have worked with a number of brands across categories, from founder-led entrepreneurs all the way to Fortune 100s. And in that time, my titles have shifted drastically. I've been called a strategist, a founder therapist, a brand whisperer, a cutthroat editor, an accidental author. What I have done has changed dramatically in that time. But the thing that I have stayed remote on, I have stayed focused on, is helping business owners to create magnetic, resilient, focused brand ecosystems. That's the heart of everything that I've done, regardless of how people have titled me. So I say that to say that I walk the walk of what I'm actually teaching. I don't just teach these things and not do them myself. I have not ever been defined by a single service or offer or category that I've worked in, which is very unusual for my profession. A lot more people would just be in beauty or just be in CPG. I get that, but for me, that didn't resonate. So I really chose a different way to signify what my own brand was about. So some of you may already be familiar with this. In fact, if you've come to any of my workshops before, you're very, very familiar with this. And I'm sorry if it's repeat for you, but unfortunately, this is how most people still think of brand when they hear that term. They think of a logo, a slogan, fonts, color scheme, look and feel of their packaging. That is not your brand. Your brand is a perception. Those are expressions of your brand at best. In my industry, we call them branding or your visual identity. And they're important, don't get me wrong, but a brand is not a logo. Okay, Robin, so then what is a brand? Well, one of my favorite authors, who's the godfather of brand strategy, Marty Neumeier, gives us this definition for brand. A brand is a person's gut feeling about a product, service, or organization. That means it's a perception. It is a reputation. It is an impression that is shaped by how people think of you, your product, or your company. Now, this doesn't mean that you are powerless when it comes to your brand or that you should leave it up to your customer either. We're going to talk about the bit that is within your control today, but I wanted to just start with this definition of what a brand is before we go any further. So as a strategist, I never address a problem without first understanding the context of that problem. After hundreds of hours of speaking with founders and marketers alike, these are the three most common external challenges that they've had in the most recent time. These are what I like to call our case for resilience. The first one is market shifts. This can be at a macro level: inflation, stagflation, tariffs, the recession. At a micro level, it can be just simply the way that people change their customer behaviors, maybe the way that they changed shopping for clothing or renting movies, right? So market shifts is something that's constantly an uncertainty that founders worry about. Number two is tech advances or platform changes. This isn't just about AI, although AI is changing how customers are doing just about everything. It's also about other kinds of tech advancements, software developments, platform shifts. I mean, I don't even need to get into the algorithms, right? They seem to change almost overnight. So if you are living in a single platform focused on only one social channel that is the source of all of your traffic, you're in a very dangerous place because you don't really own that audience. And then there are just cultural shifts, changes in trends. It's not easy. As somebody who came from the editorial world, I can tell you it is not easy to stay with the trends and the constant micro movements that are updating almost daily. I very rarely see brands that can actually ride a trend all the way through and get any kind of longevity to it. It is just not a sound structure for your brand strategy. It does not give you the long-term equity that you hope it will. Right now, I would love for all of you to put in the chat which one of these most resonates for you. 1, 2, or 3. All right. Ooh, good combination of things here. Okay, it's across the board. A lot of ones. Interesting. 1 and 2. Thank you for being honest. You can say 1, 2, and 3 too. It's okay. I won't judge. Brilliant. Okay. External forces are actually a little bit easier to spot coming. It's the internal forces that'll get you. These were the most common internal challenges that I've heard in these discussions. Number 1, product pivots. Most companies that I've come across will pivot their product or their business or their audience at least once. So if your brand is completely locked around what you do, as in what your product is, then anytime you change that, you have to start from scratch with your brand. It's a really vulnerable place to be in. Number two, burnout and turnover. Founder fatigue is real. I have felt this one viscerally myself, so I know it to be true. Employee churn. Listen, too many businesses make salary and perks the only incentive. But the reality is that people want to feel that their work means something, that it actually aligns with their own values, and that it reflects the way that they feel and who they are, what their identity is. It's not just about the money to them. And then number three, restructures. This can be changes to leadership, could be mergers, could be that your business gets acquired. As a founder, you assume that whoever you're passing the baton to is someone that's going to see your legacy and values through. And unfortunately, that's just not always the case. Ben & Jerry's being a perfect example of this. I'm trying to remember if it was Ben or Jerry that recently left, but one of them had recently left the business because when they had sold the business, it started to shift. The values of the company and the brand were no longer staying relevant, and leadership really clashed as to what that meant for the future of the brand. All right. Now I'll have you drop a 1, 2, or 3 in the chat with which one of these internal forces are you most challenged with right now? 1, 2, or 3. To burnout. I see a ton of burnout in my business. I tell you what, 1, 2, and 3. Yep. 3, interesting. A lot more people going through restructures. That's so interesting. Awesome. Good to know. Across the board, this is I love it because this is such a mixed bag. There's such a mixed crowd today. All right. So after almost 10 years of building 100+ brands and talking to founders every single day, writing a book about building brand ecosystems, here is what I can tell you without a shred of a doubt. The future belongs to brands that know how to bend without breaking. You have to be able to hold complexity and uncertainty and clarity in the same space, which seems kind of counterintuitive, but let me explain. There is no singular framework, no tactic, no neatly wordsmithed deck that is going to do this for you. You need something that's specific enough to be memorable, but robust enough to give you range. That's why you can't back it into your product. Your product doesn't give you range, and it doesn't give you as much certainty. If you pivot, you're going to have to rebrand all over again. But if you make your brand about something other than your product, then you actually have a shot of continuing to be known for what you want to be known for and just finding different ways to solve it. Okay. Let's talk about some brands that did this well. These are the brands that managed to endure changes in their industries. I'm going to play a video for you by this brand from Eastern Townships, which is actually a hospitality brand in Quebec.
Bonjour, est-ce que je peux vous aider?
Sorry, I don't speak French. I'm just visiting.
Well, then welcome to Canada's Eastern Townships. Where are you visiting from?
I'm American.
Ah, okay.
Brilliant. Let me give you some of the context of when this ad came out. It was directly after the tariffs were announced on Canada, and there was so much tension between these two countries. And I think this brand really knew how to capitalize on that moment. And surprisingly, they flipped the script on it. They shifted the perception, and they maintained what they were about: hospitality. So this is just to say that I know a lot of people have a lot of criticism around forming a point of view in a highly polarized moment or environment, but this is a point of view. It is a point of view about acceptance, about hospitality, even in the face of what seems to be the opposite. Brilliant ad by Eastern Townships. Headspace, I think, is another brilliant example of a brand that knew how to evolve, but still maintain who they were. So virtual reality, it's mainly seen as a distraction from the real world, hardly conducive to an app that's about meditation. But Headspace was able to meet their audience where they were by opening up a space where people could actually find their grounding in the virtual world. It was a great example of how do you maintain the mindfulness that your brand is about instead of staying locked into this is the way somebody must be mindful through our product or our app. And Array. I don't know how many of you are in the supplement category, but I can tell you there's some things that I feel the industry is just famous for that are quite annoying. They are all about the quick fixes, especially in this post-Ozempic craze. And they're endless add to cart funnels. You know the ones I'm talking about, where you're like, add to cart, you want to go through the checkout process, and it's just a constant, do you want this product as well? Do you want this product as well? Oh my land almighty. Array was different. Array focused on the root causes and the holistic wellness. They made their brand something that not only visually looked different from what was out there, but viscerally felt different. Not only that, most recently, they have introduced a product that is serving an underserved audience, women 45 plus, who had largely been forgotten in their industry. A brilliant example of a brand that is still on the rise, but knew how to evolve to meet the moment. Okay, let's look at the flip side. These are some brands that unfortunately didn't evolve and are now paying the price. So for Forever 21, they were great at providing cheap clothing. I mean, how many of us didn't shop at that store, right? When you just needed something quick. They were on every trend, but they also really did so without following any kind of point of view of their own. So as more and more fast fashion online retailers grew in the space, their identity watered down, and they didn't really have anything to ground themselves with. And customers eventually moved on. The only lever they had to pull was price. And unfortunately, that's a race to the bottom. Without that, they never were able to evolve, and eventually they faced bankruptcy. RIP. Oh, yes, Peyton, I hear you. I was a member of the wing myself. I actually really loved this space. I felt that it had hit so many marks on the brand side of things externally. Their welcome process, their gifts, their programming, my goodness, even the names of their boardrooms were all influential women figures. But they had really backed themselves into being a brand that was about diversity and inclusivity. And unfortunately, they broke from the inside. Reports started to come out of a toxic leadership and moments of exclusivity being showcased across their locations. This, combined with the challenges of the pandemic, ultimately meant the downfall of the wing. This is just a perfect example of why your brand cannot solely be a reflection of your external part of your brand, right? Your external forces of your business. That can't be the only place that you showcase or amplify your brand. It needs to work internally too. Otherwise, you're running the risk of you're talking the talk, but you're not walking the walk. Okay, so what does it take to create brand resilience? You must have focus. Each one of these brands proves that resilience isn't about doing everything. It isn't. It's not all about being everywhere. It's about doing one thing consistently well that's not just your product. Your product doesn't allow you to talk about it for hours and days and years. Like if you talk just about your product all the time, eventually people get bored. They don't care about your features. They really don't. You have to hit them with something that they do care about, which is meeting the moment, giving them something that they need to hear right then, and aligning that with the values of your own brand. So in each one of these cases, their brand acted as a North Star above and beyond their product. It was fluid enough to evolve, but specific enough to hold them steady. For Aura, it was about this unapologetic commitment to living a long life. And that's showcased in this most recent campaign from the brand, Live Fast, Die Old. What does that have to do with their product? Not a whole lot, but it has everything to do with what they want, what they stand for as a brand. For Airbnb, it was about belonging. Nothing in most of their brand marketing has anything to do with just renting rooms. It's all about how you can create a more rich and textured experience in the places that you visit. For those of you who might not be aware, Savannah Bananas, this started out as a third-rate team that was in bankruptcy. They decided to make some shifts and they held firm to what they believed in, which was play. They reoriented their brand around Banana Ball, which is something they created, effectively disrupting the baseball industry, a 100-year-old industry. Now their focus is all about in the entertainment of the fans. They make them part of the spectacle. So if right now you're thinking to yourself that your brand is actually only rooted in what you sell, then every pivot, every change, an algorithm shift can essentially take you down. But if you're rooted in what you stand for, your point of view becomes the anchor. It holds you steady even in times of uncertainty, and it makes your brand magnetic. So the real question is, how does your brand become known for something else, a bigger idea beyond just what you sell? How do you do that? Start with a universal theme. It's called universal because it's something that appeals to a lot more people. People may not feel or think that they need your product, which is why you need to start with something that they might actually need. So we talked about Savannah Bananas being locked into play. We talked about Airbnb being about belonging. We talked about Aura being about longevity. For While on Earth, it's about self-actualization. Here's a fitness brand that isn't about pumping iron or leaderboard bragging rights. It's about making the most of the time that you have here, hence the name While on Earth. Mini, coherently, is about freedom. Their universal theme is the reason for their belief around smaller is better and more fun. Probably one of the best examples I've seen of brand placement was Mini and their car placement in The Italian Job. Because here are 3 rambunctious robbers running around town in these Minis that really set the place in your mind to perceive Mini as a car about a brand about freedom. Here's some others. So Headspace, not surprisingly, is a brand about mindfulness, again, rather than just a mindfulness app or a meditation app. We talked about Eastern Township as a brand that's ultimately about hospitality. For Patagonia, this is a brand that isn't just passionate about sustainability. They have baked environmental stewardship into every piece of their business, including their internal culture. The brand actually gives employees time off to volunteer with environmental organizations, and they will sponsor environmental internships where employees can actually work up to 2 months with a nonprofit of their choice whilst receiving their Patagonia salary and benefits. Oh my word. Couldn't imagine Amazon doing something like that. Liquid Death. This is one of my favorite examples. Again, if you have attended any one of my workshops, you know that I love this brand. They made their brand about death to plastic. Now, their product is just water, but it's water in a can. They could have spent their marketing dollars talking about how metal is infinitely recyclable, but they didn't. They leaned into this idea of death to plastic, murder your thirst. They turned hydration into a rebellious act. And they have over-the-top heavy metal aesthetics because, again, their brand is about heavy metal through and through. Dove. For 2 decades, this brand has challenged the narrow beauty standards through campaigns like Real Beauty. And in their most recent initiative, The Real Cost of Beauty, they go a step further, showing the toll harmful beauty ideals have on mental health, especially for young girls, and empowering their audience to decide what beauty is for themselves. All right. We are going to do an exercise. I am going to get you thinking in this space for your brand. So I'm going to give you the prompt, and then I'm going to actually show you some examples of how our clients have used this exact exercise to really understand what their point of view is. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to choose one universal theme your brand can anchor to. It may take you a bit. It may mean that you need to jot down a few potential ideas for you. That's fine. Feel free to do that as I'm going through these examples with you. Then I want you to determine one conflict at the heart of that theme that gives your brand tension. That conflict should feel like this versus that, rich versus poor, quality versus quantity, old versus new. There's lots of different universal conflicts for you to choose from there. I'll go through a few examples with you, but see if you can get to the heart of what your conflict is as it relates to that universal theme. And then finally, brainstorm one simple, concrete idea of how you would express that theme. This could be a social post, it could be a tagline, it could be a campaign idea, a PR stunt, an event idea, a customer experience, whatever you want. This is just a way for you to see how fertile is that idea? How easy is it for the ideas to start coming for you? All right, let me show you some examples from actual clients that we've worked with at Young & Co. So Henson is such an interesting case. This was a brand that had a unique attribute. They made a razor that was made to last a lifetime. But when they came to work with us, they were all focused about telling the customer about the attributes of their product instead of drawing them in by challenging the disposability and market-driven norms of the shaving industry. So their universal theme was about truth and integrity. Their conflict was transparency versus deception. And the expression, the idea that we came up with for this brand, I like to call it gaslighting. It highlighted all the ways that the shaving industry was placing blame on the customer for things like razor burn and bumps, telling them that they needed better technique or more shaving cream, when actually our technique wasn't the problem. It was their subpar products. So it's just one example for you. Here's another one of my favorite brands that we've worked on strategy for this year. This is a brand close to my heart. It is a hidden clubhouse for creatives with locations here in LA as well as in Idlewild. This is a brand that at its core is about helping people move through resistance to growth, curiosity, and expression. Their universal theme is becoming or personal evolution. Their conflict at the center of that brand is about growth versus stagnancy. And the expression, the idea that we came up with for this brand is the unfinished pop-up. So this was actually kind of different from your average workshop or pop-up event, where the point wasn't to walk away with something that was complete, but instead to enjoy the actual process of the work. Half-painted murals, open canvases, raw materials. Participants were meant to co-create, reflect, and leave behind a trace of their process. Highly recommend checking out Nina's space, by the way, if you are in the LA area. Okay, and for all of you solopreneurs that are in the room today, I do not want you thinking that this doesn't apply to you, because here is a brand that I work with who is a one-woman show. She owns a ice cream business that is all about connection. She didn't come in knowing that. She came in thinking, okay, I'm running a small ice cream catering business in South Florida, but how do I make my brand more noticeable to other people? We went through a point of view process that I take my clients through and landed on human connection as her universal theme. So the conflict at the center of her brand point of view is disconnection versus authentic connection. And the expression "sweeter together" was the tag that we came up with, something that would still pay homage to what she was selling, but in a more visceral way, in a way that gave her a little bit more range to work with. And this concept carried over into the brand experience too. So we invented this idea of ice cream with icebreakers, where every touch point would provide a fun conversation starter between strangers. A simple example, one that I mocked up myself, was just this little prompt that she would put on a napkin. What's your popsicle name? Something that you could ask a perfect stranger and just have fun in the moment. All right. Let's get into it. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to go through this, okay? Jot down a few potential universal themes your brand can anchor to. Then you're going to choose one. Determine the conflict at the heart of your theme. That's step 2. And finally, brainstorm one simple, concrete expression. Now, while you're workshopping this, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'm going to address them while we're working on this for the next 5 minutes, okay? So please, by all means, put your questions into the chat and I will see if I can answer them. Ooh, great question from Olivia. For founder-led brands, could that universal theme be the founder themselves, the world through their eyes? This is a really great question because as the world likes to hear more from people, following people rather than companies, it can actually be to your benefit to make your brand more about your own point of view. I think that takes it's a very different kind of strategy, one in which you're locking it into your personal brand rather than a company brand. So keep in mind that there's some implications to that. That said, yes, could the universal theme be about the founder, as in like the founder's point of view? Yes, it can, but it can't just be Olivia Cleary as the center. It still needs to be clear about what's the bigger point, what's the bigger topic or theme. So if there's something that is true to you personally that you feel like you emulate as a personal brand and you want your company brand to represent that, yes, then absolutely it can. Let's see what else we've got here. Okay, ooh, this is a good one. We have built a brand around these themes versus attributes, but in thinking about it, how do you find the theme that you should lean into the most? This is actually the very work that I do with both clients one-on-one and in my accelerator, because most of the time, the problem isn't that you have a lack of ideas in your brand. It's actually that you have way too many ideas, way too many things that are competing for attention. You have to have focus. You have to choose one that is going to be your utmost. You have to prioritize it more than anything else. Now, it doesn't mean that those other attributes couldn't live in your story somewhere, but you have to decide which one is the most important one to the perception of your brand. Really great question, though. What else we got here? How about meeting the unmet need? So there is absolutely a way for you to include an insight about your customer. We call it a human insight as part of your brand point of view story. But a pain point is not a universal theme. It is a pain point. It is a singular pain point. So it's not a point of view. It's something that you can solve, and you can absolutely make it part of your universal theme, but innately it is not a universal theme, if that makes sense. Okay, one more minute on this exercise. I love how many people are actually sharing their answers in here. By the way, if you would like some feedback on your answers, I will share with you a way to DM me to get that. I'm always happy to give you my point of view. But if you're looking to take this a step further and really nail it with your brand, I'll talk about some ways to do that. All right. So a universal theme is just the tip of the iceberg with building your brand point of view, your brand strategy. If you are ready to turn that brand into an asset for your business, these are the next steps that you can take with me. So I have an accelerator called Build Your Brand Universe. In this, you will shape the center of gravity of your brand world, which is your brand point of view or strategy. This is done through an exclusive cohort. I hand select every single member. There are only 10 to 15 spots with every cohort, and I only run this 4 times. So the next one is launching November 1st. For those of you that are ready right now to apply for that, go ahead and go to the address here at the bottom. This is young.co/accelerator, and you can apply there. I also have my book. If you're looking for something that's a bit more of a DIY option, I wrote the book that I wish had existed when I first started building brands. So this is a very practical book that goes through the 5 layers of building a resilient, magnetic brand world. It's very interactive. It's meant to be very true to form of my workshops. There are prompts, there are exercises to help you get to some of these answers on your own. And then, yes, for those of you who want the fast version, the very handheld option, and a lot more clarity and focus and accountability for your brand, you can reach out to me about working one-on-one through my consulting offer. To do that, you go to thisisyoung.co/contact. So these are the options if you're like, I am ready today to solve this problem. If the solution is right, but the timing is not right for you, listen, I totally get it. That's why I built my own brand universe. These are the ways that you can stay in my orbit, right? So my handle, I am the most active on TikTok and Instagram. You can find me in both places with this handle. I have a Substack called Yes And, where I share insights, inspiration, and ideas for building a more resilient and magnetic brand world. Find me on Substack. I love interacting with people there. And then my website, I have podcasts, articles, previous case studies, all of the bells and whistles on my website. Everything lives there. Feel free to go there. All right. And we are ready for Q&A.
We absolutely are. And Robin, thank you so much for bringing us through so clearly the universal theme and all of those concepts. I want to jump right into a question that was bubbling up around the universal theme. You know, this is a driving force behind how your brand can withstand, but are there universal themes traps? Are there universal themes that become really trendy? And how can founders here spot if they're falling into, I don't know, say the authenticity trap that sort of happened over the past couple of years?
Yes, absolutely. So I think that there's a lot of themes that become more performative than anything else. And those you have to be very careful, because essentially what you're doing is you're just following a trend, right? So you have to ask yourself, and this is why it's so crucial that you think about how this is going to impact externally as well as internally. It's not just about solidifying the theme. That's just one part of the bigger picture. It's also about how you're going to turn the volume up to really show that you care about that theme. So the more that you walk the walk, the more people will actually perceive you as the brand that does that and is authentic about it, right?
Right.
Patagonia being a perfect example. I can't think of a single other brand that lives up to their brand promise more than that brand does. To be clear, there are plenty of brands that are about sustainability, but none can hold a candle to Patagonia, right? So it's about the way in which you really lean into it. Yeah, I think authenticity, sustainability, clean living, these are a lot of kind of catch-all universal themes. And that's not to say that you couldn't go that direction. But if you're going to go that direction, first you have to look at, well, does this give us actually any positioning power? Is this something that even our industry needs? Or is the space already crowded with that? And two, if we are treading on a territory in which our competitors could claim the exact same universal theme, how are we going to do it better than that?
Yeah. Well, that leads to another great question that came in when folks were registering for the session, which is how can smaller companies compete with the big companies? We might have the same universal theme, but they're offering lower prices. They're like doing everything that we can't. So what can smaller and emerging companies do?
Well, first of all, I hope that this is music to the ears to the people that are in this room. Being the cheapest option is not a great strategy for every brand. In fact, in most cases, it's a terrible strategy. It doesn't mean that it's in all cases, right? Amazon has really locked themselves into being operational efficiency. That's not just cheaper, but it's faster, and they've been incredibly successful at doing that. But operational efficiency also has its own setbacks. It means that Amazon doesn't care about the experience, really. They're not shipping us these, products that are in these gorgeous boxes and, with tissue paper. They don't care about that because they're about operational efficiency. That's where they've decided to lock their brand into, right? But I think in many cases, when you're the cheapest option, just like Forever 21, it's a race to the bottom, because if people are only choosing you because you're the cheapest option, there's always going to be somebody who's going to be able to do it $1 cheaper, $2 cheaper. And if that's all you've got in your repertoire, it's a slippery slope for your business. So I think in most cases, it's actually much better for you to find some other way that you can be stronger. And I will also tell you this, as somebody who works primarily with founder-led companies and small businesses, there are so many ways that you can be better that corporations just aren't, because they focus on profit. So they often cut a lot of the magic. When a company gets taken over by either private equity or a corporation, one of the first things they do is they look for ways to cut all the things that they don't see contributing to the bottom line. That's always been the card that small businesses have to play. You can create more magic. Maybe it's not scalable at that level, but you can create more magic in your customer experience that those corporations just can't.
Right. Now, just a follow-up question on creating the magic. What is the best way to know, is this the magic that I believe is important or the magic that my customer believes is important?
That's such a, it's such a, it depends.
Okay.
So you will, this comes down to what your brand is about too. You don't want to just create things that have nothing to do with what you want that ultimate theme to be, what you want that ultimate perception to be, right? So in Patagonia's case, it's that everything comes back to sustainability. They make that the benchmark for everything. So much to the point that they tell their employees to actively seek out ways in which the company could be doing that better, right? And they reward them accordingly.
Yeah.
So I would say the same thing to you. Create moments within your brand experience that further that idea. So for example, I worked with a client recently who has a home goods company, and their universal theme was all about this sort of slow living, like really enjoying sort of the rich textured side of these everyday moments. And what we determined was that their conflict is essentially slow versus fast. It's like in this fast-paced world, we're no longer taking time to enjoy, to stop and enjoy. So some of the things that I gave them that were just little, seemingly little things that would force their customers to do that. A simple one would be like, they had an event coming up. I said, while you have people in line for this event, serve them tea. You cannot rush with a cup of tea in your hands.
Oh.
you,
I'm already slowing down, Robin. Like,
I
you've
know.
got me hooked.
Like, listen, just by factor of you're serving them that's something that's hot, right? You're not going to be rushing to a bin to get whatever out of it if they're holding something hot in their hands. So it's just about, again, I think the first part is answering that for your brand. What is the thing that we care the most about? And then figuring out all the ways in which you can drive that impression.
Yeah. Now, for the folks tuning in, because several people have asked, I'm at a precipice where I feel like we need to refresh, our style and everything, but also our identity and what we're known for. Or, I'm considering a shift in values for the brand. What are the best practices for making changes without alienating the customer?
Really good question. I mean, listen, by factor of putting out a point of view, you're going to alienate someone. That's good. That's not a bad thing, especially at the beginning. You will gain traction by being willing to sacrifice certain audiences. But here's the trick. When we work on brand building with our clients, we don't base it off personas or demographics, because again, that's short-lived. And also, people don't necessarily shop the way that their demographics tell them they should, right? So instead, we work it around psychographics. We build a brand for a mindset. So you're still not building a brand for everyone, because as many of you know, building a brand for everyone is building a brand for no one, right? You're still not building for everyone. You're just dividing it up in a slightly different way, right? And building for a mindset actually tells me a lot more about the behaviors and the decisions and the rituals, and the way in which your customer actually shops is very emotional, right? So if we make it more about that, then we can more actively target that audience and align our brand with that mindset. Right. So I'd say, if you're going through this experience, do not just jump to an aesthetic rebrand, because as we've seen with like Crate and Barrel, it does not work well. It does not work well. Again, I could point to that as a perfect example of when you're just following what a modern aesthetic should look like, or what you're following what there's trends even in the graphic design world that was, right. It's not that it's bad design. It was actually great design, but it completely negated what that brand was about. It's like they completely missed the step where they were like, we need to be true to who we are. What is our identity? And then let those decisions be led by that.
Right.
So listen, even major corporations are, they get into these traps of just skipping the strategy and going straight to the deliverables. And it
Right.
always ends up bad news.
Yeah.
So,
Well, this is a great segue into bad news moments, and Bridget mentioned this in the chat. You were highlighting Dove, incredible brand, but not every brand is immune from a misstep or a campaign that doesn't land. But she noted that Dove bounced themselves back. For when our businesses miss the mark or don't meet the moment, how can we recover and rebuild trust?
yeah. So it's a tricky question because, again, like most of these questions, it completely depends.
Yeah.
Here's what I will say. What most brands do is the thing you shouldn't do, which is just immediately go on and apologize. Now, listen, there are cases where there's nothing to do but apologize.
Yes.
Because the brand acted in a way that wasn't locked into its values, in which case an apology is necessary. But most of the time, like I'm thinking Apple that recently put out this ad where they had one of those big commercial kind of machines that
Oh,
were
the clock.
like yes, that you know,
Yeah.
it was like stamping down on like a
Yeah.
guitar and paint and all the things.
Yes. The
And like,
crusher.
yes, the crusher. And it was not received well by their primarily creative audience, right? Because it was a smart idea. Frankly, it was not an original idea, but it was a smart idea. I get where they were trying to be clever with it, right? And they came out and they apologized, and I'm like, Steve Jobs would be rolling over in his grave. That is not there's no need. All they had to do was say, hey, listen, as a creative company and as a, speaking to our creative audience, you understand that not all art is received the way that it's intended, right? They did not need to apologize. I felt like it was actually against their values to come out and apologize for something like that. It wasn't really offensive. It was just something that divided the room a bit, right?
Right.
This is
And knowing the line between when have we truly offended or hurt a community
yes.
versus when have we done something that our fans are calling us to the table to say, you can do better creative, you can do better work. And there's a big difference, it sounds like.
The thing that I always prepare people for is the benefit of a point of view is that you are going to get more traction than you would if you don't have one. That's on the plus column. On the challenging side of that column is you're going to ruffle some feathers, and you have to have integrity in what you're saying. You have to be willing to back that up. It doesn't mean you always need to be right. That's a perfect example. You don't always need to be right, but you do need to be willing to back up what you're putting out there, which is why it's so important that you're not only clear yourself about what those values are, what that point of view is, but also how the other departments in your company are functioning as a reflection of it. The wing being a perfect example of that. I have not seen, I mean, to date, I have not seen a community that had a more magnetic, beautiful brand experience than that company did. And it broke from the inside out because, again, it actually worked to their detriment because here they were cosplaying, right?
Yeah.
And when they showed that they weren't really reflective of those values, it made them look inauthentic. So, and it's RIP the wing, because
Right.
I really did love. I was a
They
member.
took over, yeah.
I made some fantastic, connections through that company, and it really is sad to see it gone. And it does feel like the kind of thing that was just a misstep. Somebody just missed the mark there and said, hey, we should really have some things in place to make sure that our employees are actually reflecting this in the everyday moments.
Right.
Listen, this is why I keep hounding on a brand is not just an aesthetic. It is not just your marketing. So if in your mind you're grouping brand under marketing, you are shortchanging what your brand can be. It is everything that can impact that perception. So
Right.
every experience, every 404 error page is an opportunity to either move your brand forward or not,
Mhm.
right?
Well, and I think you've tapped on something that Ariel just mentioned. How do we push our theme to the customer without shoving it down their throat, particularly maybe on social media? And so, is there a finer point that you would want to put on the living it versus or walking it versus telling it?
Yes. So I think to your point, if you have this universal theme, there are going to be thousands of ways for you to explore it. And
Mhm.
that can be the part that you test out. That can be the place where you play a bit, right? Liquid Death being a perfect example of that. They chose a theme where there are so many different ways for them
Yeah.
to explore it. And I will tell you the most amazing thing that I've ever heard about Liquid Death is that they do not have a brand book. They do not have a brand guide. Can you believe that? Like living in this world, I'm like, how?
How do
But
they do it?
how do they do it? How do they do it indeed? How do they create campaigns over and over and over that are completely consistent with their brand without having any kind of frame of reference visually on what that looks like? And the thing is, I think it's more visceral. It's more of an understanding. It's sort of a rule amongst their team. It's like they all sort of understand energetically what the brand is trying to accomplish. And that allows them the space to go and push the boundaries. And you will have to push the boundaries. I mean, a Dove being another great example. Their campaign around real beauty has changed. There's been so many different iterations. When they started, it was about print campaigns, right? More recently, it is about social media. It's about the effects of how we're seeing, these toxic beauty standards on social media. So it evolves over time, right? But you can continue to explore it as long as you stay true to what it is you want to be perceived as. And you should continue to evolve it.
Amazing. Well, Robin, I think we could talk brand all day, but you have been so generous with your time. All of our founders tuning in, you have all been so generous spending your hour with